Hello, we're delighted to have here this afternoon Jean Lambert MEP for the Green Party for London, where this year's climate camp is based. And I want to ask her about one of the most important issues which has been a recurrent theme here in Climate Camp, which is the role of workers in stopping climate change, and whether we can, Jean, can we even ask working people to support the measures required to stop climate change in the midst of a recession such as we're having now?
I think you can ask people to sign up to the measures that are required to hold back on climate change, and I think it's really important that you have to include working people within that, because one of the big changes, of course, is in the world of work, not just in the type of work in where people, will typically think about sort of more wind farms, more solar panels or that side of things, but it's about transforming the world of work in itself so that you're looking at every job being a green job effectively.
So what are green jobs? I mean, you've been working on this a bit, haven't you?
Yes, we've been working on this a bit, obviously sort of part of the Green New Deal, but even before that. And you've also now got a growing interest as well from a lot of the trades unions. You've recently seen the International Labour Organisation working with international trade unions to come forward with a whole set of proposals about green jobs and how that will have an effect in terms of agriculture and the sort of agriculture you're looking at, in terms of shifting of production as well from maybe private transport to more public transport and so on, and looking at how that will happen not just in Western economies but also in some of the world's poorer countries to improve the standard of living there.
Right, so you're saying that somebody who works in a factory or works in a supermarket has nothing to fear from the measures, the urgent measures required to take climate change. Can we believe that?
I think it depends what you think there is to fear. I think there's a lot more to fear if you're not actually taking action. If you're looking at, that we know that it's poorest people who tend to have the worst effects of climate change, that, or indeed environmental sort of pollution or anything else like that. And that the world of work is changing anyway. So therefore you might as well take it in both hands, as it were, and look at the environmental side of that. So you've got the TUC in the UK has been working in a number of workplaces on pilot projects as to what can be done to change the energy systems in companies, to look at the whole sort of chain of production. If you think about a small print company in my part of London in Walthamstow, they've taken the whole printing process and really gone through it to look at how can they reduce waste, how can they work with inks which don't damage the environment, how can they retrain their workforce and indeed provide more jobs in a world of work where they say that everything they produce is rubbish, is their line. So they've really taken that whole structure the whole way through. They're still in business. They're still providing jobs, within the local economy because they've taken this really seriously. So there is a lot that can be done, I think.
Okay, and certainly the reception of the general public to the climate camp being here is from my point of view, was surprisingly, surprisingly well received, in that we just pitched up here because we have to. Now, I think one of the surprising things for people that are not part of these movements when they come in is just how it's organised as a kind of autonomous space, as the consensus decision making, the whole kind of process like that. Now, there is an attack on autonomous spaces, isn't there, by the state? There's an attack on London in terms of squatting and so forth. There's and the preparations for the Olympics. There was also an attack on the Big Green Gathering, which is one of the last spaces of that kind on the festival circuit. Could you tell us something about that?
Well, the Big Green Gathering has been going for years and was originally sort of set up to provide a sort of a think space for people, it wasn't necessarily about decision making. It was so that people could have a social space as well as a political space to look at how you wanted to make changes in society and to discuss that in a very free and open way. And that the whole time we've been seeing more and more restrictions put in place on it, more and more things, restrictions about the stewarding of it, who was attending, all of these sort of things coming in a way that made it absolutely crystal clear that the local authorities and the police actually really found it almost something that they didn't want. And this year we've seen as almost the final thing with the injunctions being taken out on it at the very, very last minute. So we've seen people lose a lot of money on it, and that's money which has been raised with a great deal of difficulty. We've seen people's work basically trashed, and it's very difficult to see sort of what it was that people were so afraid of, that they really felt that the big green gathering couldn't go ahead. But it is symptomatic of, I think, increasingly this view that you have to fit a certain mould, that you can only behave in certain ways, and that the idea that you can actually do something which is autonomous, will have its own controls within it, is seen almost as unbelievable. And that
isn't about making profit.
It's certainly not about making profit. It's about people really getting together to discuss what way they want to discuss, in a way in which they want to do it, in a way which is non-threatening as well. I mean, the whole sort of ethos of the big green gathering was about peace. So, and I find this really distressing, and you're seeing it in a way which is not just about those sorts of gatherings, it's about even the privatisation of open space, so that you have nowhere really any longer, well, it becomes more and more difficult to even have street stalls, to do street demonstrations, but everything now is becoming much more within the private sector, as a way which then really begins to limit political space in that widest sense. And I think this is really distressing, and something we really should be taking action on.
On the Big Green itself, when that policeman told one of the organisers that this was political and came from above, where do you think that came from?
I think you have a choice about it's political and came from above. I think that it's part of it will be sort of within the local authority, who feel very uncomfortable that these are not people like us. Because also, of course, within the Big Green Gathering, you've got a strong tradition as well of travelling. And that's also still a section of the population which is very much under threat, and indeed there's almost a move to eradicate travellers from our culture, which again
it's been going for years, hasn't it?
Centuries. And here we are sort of at the European Union level, where we've got more and more legislation on anti-discrimination, which is designed to protect Roma and to give people who have that as their culture and their tradition that space in society. And yet here we are sort of in the UK, we can't cope with that any longer, because it doesn't fit neatly. So I think that part of it as well is that there is a growing nervousness in the whole of the anti-terrorism debate, which is also about shutting down places that you can't control. And that this is also part of it, and a growing concern that people who want to take non-violent direct action are actually then a threat to the state. So I think that is also partly where this from above is coming from.
Jean, thanks very much. And to watch more shows, go to climatecamp.tv.